This podcast draws inspiration from the work of Ghulam Ahmad Pervez, a distinguished Quranic scholar born in 1903 in India. Pervez dedicated his life to the study and exposition of the Quran, making its teachings accessible in Urdu through numerous books and lectures. He also founded and edited Tulu-e-Islam, a magazine that garnered an international readership. Notably, Pervez's 6 seminal lectures on Quranic permanent values were translated into English by the British researcher and author Payam Mustafar. The concept of permanent values lies at the heart of Pervez's work. He believed that all people require the same universal principles to live in harmony. These enduring truths are essential for fostering peace and security within society. To hear other podcasts in this series, and watch other videos, please subscribe to the SigPost channel and visit Signat website.
All right, get ready, because today we're going deep, really deep into fascinating stuff from the Quran. Permanent values, they're called. We're working with notes and excerpts that a scholar of Islamic thought put together.
It's going to be really interesting, I think.
Oh, yeah, not like a boring lecture or anything like that.
Yeah.
We want to look at kind of like universal human values that are there in these teachings. It's like no matter what you believe, we're all trying to figure out how to live a good life.
Right. Exactly. And what's really fascinating is how these values, they're presented not as like rules you have to follow, but more as guidelines, you know?
Right.
They're like principles for building a just and harmonious society.
Okay.
And encouraging personal growth at the same time.
I love that. It's like a win-win, right? So this term permanent values, what makes them permanent? Is it like they're set in stone forever?
That's a great question. The idea is that they're universal, timeless, they apply across cultures and throughout history. They're like, bedrock for a just and ethical life.
So no matter what's happening in the world around us, they're always going to be relevant.
Yeah.
All right, that makes sense. But how do they actually play out in our everyday lives?
Yeah.
Especially in today's world.
Well, let's start with the foundation.
Okay.
The Quran's concept of the human self. It's called nafs.
Nafs.
Yeah. It's described as this divine energy inside every person, kind of like a spark of the divine within us.
Oh, I love that. So
Huh.
like we each have a little piece of God inside. That's a really powerful idea. But what does that actually mean? How does it affect how we live?
Think of it as the source of our free will.
Okay.
Our ability to reason, to make moral choices. It's what sets us apart from animals.
So it's not just sitting there passively. We have to cultivate it somehow.
That's right. The Quran suggests that by cultivating this inner divine energy, we can reach our full potential as human beings.
And how do we do that?
Well, that's a question for a whole other deep dive, I
Right,
think.
we'll save that one.
Yeah. But for now, let's build on this idea of the nafs and look at the next permanent value, respect for humanity.
Okay, so if we each have this spark of the divine inside of us, does that mean that we just automatically respect other people? Do we just inherently see it in everyone?
You're getting it. Recognizing the divine spark in ourselves naturally leads to recognizing it in others.
Okay.
And this is why the Quran opposes all forms of racism and discrimination, because every human being, just by possessing this shared divine energy, deserves respect, deserves dignity.
I'm starting to see how these values all connect with each other. It's really cool. And speaking of treating people right, what about this idea that our status is earned through our deeds, not just given to us at birth?
That's a key point. The Quran challenges the idea of inherited status. It states that true worth is determined by our actions, not by, who our parents are. There's a powerful verse in Surah Al-Kahf, verse 19, I believe. It says, "And to all are assigned degrees according to the deeds."
Okay, that makes sense. Like, we all start with a blank slate, and it's up to us to fill it with good deeds. But I've always struggled with this, actions having consequences thing. Sometimes it feels like good people, they get dealt a bad hand, while bad people get away with everything.
That's a really fundamental concept you've just brought up, and it leads us perfectly into the next permanent value, justice. The Quran approaches justice from several different angles. Fairness, equality, appropriate consequences for actions, all of those are part of it.
So it's about more than just punishment then.
Exactly. It's about prevention,
Okay.
reformation, maintaining balance within society as a whole. And the Quran emphasizes that justice should be applied universally, even towards our enemies.
Even towards our enemies. That's a tough one. I mean, it's natural to want to get back at someone who's hurt you, but I guess true justice is about something bigger than just revenge, right?
You got it. It's about upholding what's right, no matter how we feel personally. And to really grasp the concept of justice, we need to look at this concept of kisas, which focuses on accountability. What are the repercussions of our actions?
So is Kisa's like saying every action has an equal and opposite reaction? Like a cosmic cause and effect kind of thing?
You could think of it that way. It's
Yeah.
about understanding that our actions have consequences, not just for ourselves, but also for those around us.
Hmm.
It really emphasizes personal responsibility and the need for a system that holds people accountable for the choices they make. But it's important to remember that punishment in the concept of kisas isn't about revenge.
Okay.
It's about ensuring justice is served and deterring future wrongdoing.
So it's like if somebody knows their actions will have consequences, they might think twice before doing something harmful.
Exactly.
But wait a minute, doesn't that go against the idea of forgiveness?
That's a really interesting question and a good one. Forgiveness and justice, though, they're not mutually exclusive. The Quran actually encourages both. But maybe that's a discussion for another time. For now, let's focus on this idea of individual responsibility. The Quran's really clear that each person is solely responsible for their own actions. We can't blame other people for our choices, you know,
Yeah.
or expect them to carry the burden of our mistakes.
That's a powerful statement.
Yeah.
It really puts the responsibility squarely on us to be accountable for our own lives. But it makes me wonder about helping others. If we see someone struggling, shouldn't we try to help?
You've hit on a really crucial point. The Quran encourages us to go beyond simply avoiding injustice ourselves. It calls on us to prevent injustice from happening to others.
So it's not enough to just be good yourself. You have to actually fight for good in the world.
You could say that. And this is where the concept of ihsan comes into play.
He's fine.
It's about going beyond basic fairness to restore balance, to help those in need, to take that extra step to make things right.
So Isan is like going above and beyond. Like instead of just paying for the damage you caused, you also offer to help fix it yourself.
Yeah, it is a pretty high standard. And it shows how much compassion is built into these permanent values. Now, this commitment to justice, this commitment to fairness, naturally leads to the next permanent value, the absolute rejection of slavery.
Wait, slavery was being talked about way back then. I always thought that was, a more modern issue.
Nope, the Quran very clearly emphasizes the inherent freedom and dignity of every single human being.
Wow.
And that transcends time and place. It's directly relevant to today's issues of human rights, of social justice. It's a timeless value that says all people are fundamentally equal. All people have inherent worth.
That's pretty amazing. It really shows how these values are so timeless, so relevant to our lives today.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about building a better world, what about how we govern ourselves? Does the Quran address building a just society?
Absolutely. The Quran offers guidance on establishing a just society, particularly when it comes to governance. It emphasizes adhering to divine law and the role of mutual consultation in decision-making.
So it's not about, one person calling all the shots.
Right.
It's about working together and making decisions that are best for everyone.
That's it. And there's a really important distinction here from Western democracy. Decisions are made within the framework of these permanent values, not simply by majority rule, you see.
Okay, yeah. So even if most people vote for something, if it goes against these core values, it's not really just. So who gets to decide what aligns with these values? Who gets to be in charge?
The Quran is very clear about that, about who should be entrusted with positions of authority.
Okay, tell me,
No.
what are the qualifications to be a leader in a just society?
Well, the Quran stresses that we should appoint competent individuals, people with a strong sense of responsibility, for safeguarding the nation's well-being.
So it's not about, just being popular or charismatic. It's about actually having the skills and the integrity to lead well.
That's it, exactly. And that connects really well with modern ideas about leadership, about the importance of ethical and effective governance. It's a reminder that leadership is a privilege and a responsibility. And speaking of responsibility, let's talk about the Quran's concept of risk.
Risk, what is that?
Risk refers to the provision of all means of sustenance, both physical and for human potential.
So it's about making sure everyone has the things they need, like food and shelter.
Yes, but also the things they need to reach their full potential, things like education and opportunities.
That's a huge task. So are you saying that a just society has to make sure that everyone has access to those things, to food, to shelter, education, and a chance to reach their full potential.
Exactly. A just society takes responsibility for all of its members. It's an idea that has implications for social welfare programs, for economic justice, equitable access to opportunities.
Okay, that sounds a lot like creating a safety net so no one falls through the cracks. But what about people who already have more than enough? What about those who are well off? Do they have a role to play in this?
Yes, they do. And that brings us to another really fascinating concept. The idea that resources shouldn't be hoarded for personal gain. They should be accessible to everyone.
So it's not just about the government providing for people, but also about individuals sharing what they have.
Yes, that's a big part of it. The Quran emphasizes generosity, sharing what we have beyond just basic needs. It's about contributing to the well-being of others. It's actually described as a manifestation of rabubiyat, which is all about nurturing the growth and development of others, fostering a spirit of cooperation and mutual support.
Rabubia. That makes me think of those community gardens where everyone pitches in and then they share the harvest.
Yeah.
It's recognizing that we're all connected and helping others ultimately helps everyone, even ourselves.
Yeah. You got it. And there's a really beautiful quote from Surah Ad-Dar, verse 9. We feed you for the sake of Allah alone. No reward do we desire from you, nor thanks.
Wow. That's powerful. It's like saying we're not doing this for recognition or for reward, but simply because it's the right thing to do. It's giving without expecting anything in return. It's acting from a place of real compassion and concern for others.
You've got it.
Okay, this is heavy stuff. Now, shifting gears a little bit, let's talk about a topic that can be kind of sensitive.
Yeah.
Safeguarding chastity.
It is sensitive.
Yeah, I mean, it's a topic that can get people riled up.
I hear you. But the Quran emphasizes protecting chastity. And it says that sexual relations are only permissible within the framework of marriage, nikah.
Okay, so setting boundaries and honoring the commitment of marriage?
Yes, but it's more than just a rule. The Quran says the purpose of nikah is to foster love and affection.
Okay.
Not just, for sexual gratification. It's about building a strong and committed partnership based on respect and understanding.
It's saying intimacy is something to be shared within a loving, committed relationship. But what about those who, choose not to get married? Or those who have relationships outside of marriage?
The Quran acknowledges that there are consequences, both individually and for society as a whole, when this value is violated. But maybe it's better to explore those nuances in another deep dive, one that's more focused on relationships and family structures.
Okay, that makes sense. We can't cover everything in one go. But this is already giving me so much to think about. So if we zoom out from just relationships, to the bigger picture, what does the Quran say about unity and diversity? Like, how do we deal with our differences and build a world where everyone feels like they belong?
That is crucial for building a just and harmonious society. And the Quran really emphasizes this unity and diversity.
So it's not about everyone being the same. It's about embracing our differences and finding common ground.
You got it. The Quran talks about the shared origin of all mankind.
Okay.
We are all part of one human family.
I love that. No matter our differences, we're all connected at a fundamental level. But how do we put that into practice in a world where people are so often divided?
The Quran presents itself as a common code of laws for all humanity, promoting unity and cooperation across our differences.
So it's like a guidebook for living together peacefully and respectfully.
You could think of it that way.
But what about people with different beliefs? Can there really be unity without everyone believing the same thing?
That's where the Quran's emphasis on collaboration for the common good comes in. It says that we should transcend our differences and work together for what benefits all humankind.
So focusing on our shared humanity and working towards goals that are good for everyone.
Yes. There's a quote from Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse 2, that captures this beautifully. Help you one another in righteousness and piety, but help you not one another in crime and rancor. It's like support each other in doing good and creating positive change, but don't help each other do bad things.
So choose to focus on the good and work together to build a better future. I love that.
Exactly. And that leads to a very important point, the Quran's stance on freedom of choice.
Okay.
Especially when it comes to belief.
So you're saying it's not about forcing people to believe a certain way. It's about respecting their right to choose their own path.
That's right. The Quran explicitly rejects the idea of forced conversions. True belief can only come from genuine conviction.
That's relief. I mean, it would be pretty hypocritical to talk about respecting everyone, but then try to force them to believe what we believe.
Exactly. There's a very powerful quote from Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 256. Let there be no compulsion in deen. Truth stands out clear from error.
Okay, so how do you reconcile respecting other people's beliefs with believing that your own beliefs are the right ones?
That's a question that people struggle with a lot. And maybe we can explore that a little further next time. We can look at how the Quran distinguishes between those who accept these terminate values and those who reject them.
Okay, I'm already hooked. This is really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it is.
So before we went to break, we were talking about those relative values and how they fit into the bigger picture of those permanent values we were talking about.
Right. And it's really interesting because it shows how the Quran acknowledges all the things that are important in our lives,
Yeah.
family, wealth, even life itself. But it also says that these things can be superseded by those permanent values if there's a conflict.
So it's like there's a hierarchy of values.
You could think of it that way.
Okay.
Like relative values are important for our everyday lives, but they shouldn't be the ultimate deciding factor. They're relative.
Mhm.
But permanent values, they're non-negotiable. They're like, the guiding principles that we should always be following.
Okay, that makes sense.
Mm.
But what happens when those relative values, like, our love for family or wanting wealth, what if those things clash with those permanent values?
That's tricky.
Yeah. How do we figure out how to handle that?
Well, the Quran tells us that we shouldn't get too attached to those relative values. We don't want to lose sight of what really matters. And it cautions us against putting things, material things, or even our personal attachments above those ethical principles.
So it's a constant balancing act.
Yeah.
Trying to appreciate all the good things in life, but not letting them pull us off course.
Exactly. The Quran knows it's human nature to want wealth and comfort and to love our families.
Right.
But it reminds us that those things can also tempt us. They can lead us astray if we're not careful.
That reminds me of that saying, money is the root of all evil. But I've always thought that was kind of harsh. Like, money itself isn't bad, right? It's how we use it. It's, how attached to it we get. That can be a problem.
That's a really nuanced perspective, and it really does align with the Quran's teaching. There's a verse in Surah Al-Imran that describes these desires, the desire for wealth and comfort and things. It says, fair in the eyes of men is the love of things they covet, women and sons, heaped up hoards of gold and silver, horses branded.
So it's acknowledging that it's natural to
Yeah.
want those things. But is there more to it? Is it saying something else?
It is. It's also saying that these desires, even though they're natural, can be a test.
Oh, test. Yeah.
They can test our commitment to those higher values. It calls them trials. And it says that our possessions, even our children, can become obstacles in our spiritual growth if we let them overshadow our commitment to those core principles.
Wow. So you're saying even the people we love most can be a distraction if we're not careful.
It's something to think about. And Surah At-Tahabun has a pretty stark warning about this. It says, truly, among your wives and your children are some that are enemies to yourselves.
Wow. Okay, that's intense. It's like a wake-up call to really look at our attachments and make sure they're not leading us down a path that goes against those core values. But what about wealth specifically? I've always felt kind of conflicted about this one. On the one hand, it's good to be financially secure,
Yeah.
to enjoy some of the good things in life.
Yeah.
But I also know that wealth can corrupt. It can create inequality.
And the Quran cautions against the love of wealth. It calls it a violent love.
Violent love.
Yeah.
That's a powerful image.
It is. It makes you think of all those stories we hear about people who become so obsessed with money that they'll do anything to get it,
Right, right.
Even if it means hurting other people, it's like their love for wealth just takes over. It becomes this destructive force.
It does.
And the Quran contrasts this with the example of those who use their wealth for good.
So it's not saying wealth itself is bad. It's about how we use it.
Exactly. Surah Al-Baqarah encourages giving to others, spending money out of love for him, for your kin, for orphans, for the needy, for the wayfarer, for those who ask. It's acknowledging that wealth can be a tool for good, a way to help others, a way to make the world a little bit more just, a little more equitable.
It's like, if we're fortunate enough to have abundance, it's our responsibility to share it and to help those in need.
Yeah. And Surah At-Tawbah has this powerful challenge. It asks, will you prioritize Allah, his messenger, and striving in his cause? Or will you be consumed by these personal attachments and this desire for material wealth?
It's like asking us to really think about what we value most in life,
Yeah.
you know? What are our priorities?
It is. It's making sure we're not straying too far from those core values.
Right. Okay, so we've talked about commitments, agreements, family, wealth, all of that. But what about, I don't know, our responsibility to the environment? Does the Quran address that at all?
It does. The Quran talks about protecting other forms of life, like plants and animals,
Oh, yeah.
especially crops and livestock. They're important, you know. They provide for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the Quran condemns those who destroy these resources. Surah Al-Baqarah says, when he turns his back, his aim everywhere is to spread mischief through the earth and destroy crops and cattle. But Allah loves not mischief.
So it's saying that destroying the environment, causing harm to nature is wrong.
Yes.
But I don't know, what about things like war? Isn't destruction unavoidable in those situations?
That's a good point. The Quran acknowledges that sometimes war is necessary,
Right.
to defend against injustice, to protect the innocent. And yeah, in those situations, sometimes crops and livestock are destroyed.
So it's like a lesser of two evils.
Yeah.
Like you're trying to protect human life and fight against oppression, even though it means causing harm in other areas.
That's right. The Quran permits fighting against those who have been wronged. But even in war, there are limits. Surah Muhammad says that fighting is allowed until the war lays down its burdens.
So war should be a last resort, and the goal should always be to restore peace.
Exactly. The Quran says that we should try all peaceful options first. And then, once the threat is gone, we need to focus on rebuilding, on healing.
This whole discussion about relative values has really gotten me thinking.
Yeah.
It's made me think about all those tough choices we have to make in life. Like sometimes there isn't a clear right or wrong answer. It's about weighing those different values and making decisions that feel right, decisions that match up with our conscience.
And with those core principles that we hold dear, you're absolutely right. Navigating all those relative values, it means recognizing that life is messy, that there are competing priorities, and it means making tough calls, but always trying to uphold those permanent values. They're the ones that really matter in the end.
Like having a compass, to help us find our way.
Yeah, a moral compass.
Yeah.
Are there any other relative values that the Quran talks about?
Oh, yeah, are there?
Yeah, let's look at some of those. Let's talk about commitments and agreements, and even how we treat animals and crops during a conflict.
All right, so we're back. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around this whole idea that even human life, which you'd think would be absolute,
Right.
can actually be relative when you're comparing it to those core principles we've been talking about. Justice, righteousness, all of that. It's a lot.
It is. It is. And there are even more nuances to explore. Remember, before the break, we were starting to touch on fulfilling commitments,
Yeah.
agreements. The Quran has quite a bit to say about that, too.
Oh, I'm really interested in this one. I've always believed that you should keep your word, but there are definitely times when it feels, I don't know, wrong to follow through on a promise.
Sure.
Like, what if you were tricked into making that promise?
Right.
Or what if things change and keeping that promise would actually hurt someone?
Those are great points. And the Quran recognizes that there are those situations, times when you might need to break an agreement.
Yeah.
Like Surah Al-Anfal, it says, if you fear treachery from any group, throw back their covenant to them on equal terms.
So, if you realize someone's not being honest, you're not obligated to stay in that agreement. It's like protecting yourself.
Right.
But how can you be sure if someone's being treacherous? What if it's just a misunderstanding?
Well, that's where you need wisdom, you need discernment. The Quran says that breaking agreements, it shouldn't be a casual thing. There has to be a good reason, like they violated the terms, or you genuinely believe that you'll be betrayed.
It's like, it's not about getting out of something just because it's inconvenient.
Yeah.
There has to be a real justification.
Exactly. And using agreements to deceive people, the Quran condemns that. Like Surah An-Nahl, it warns against using oaths to practice deception between yourselves. It says that's going to have bad consequences for everyone.
It's like saying don't use promises to hurt or manipulate other people. Be honest, have integrity.
Yeah.
All of that matters.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to agreements. Okay, so we've been talking about commitments to other people, but what about our responsibility to, the environment? Does the Quran say anything about that?
It does. The Quran says that it's important to protect other forms of life, like plants and animals. Especially, it mentions crops and livestock.
Yeah.
It sees them as resources vital for human life and well-being.
So morality, ethics, all of that, it's not just about humans.
Right.
It's about understanding that everything's interconnected.
It is. Surah al-Baqarah condemns those who destroy these resources. It says, "When he turns his back, his aim everywhere is to spread mischief through the earth and destroy crops and cattle. But Allah loves not mischief."
It's like saying that anyone who causes destruction or harm to the environment, well, they're going against, God's will.
Right.
But what about war? I mean, in war, destroying resources, isn't that almost always going to happen?
That's a great point. And the Quran recognizes that war is sometimes necessary
Okay.
to defend against tyranny, to protect innocent people. And yeah, sometimes in those situations, crops and livestock are destroyed. It's part of the conflict.
A tough situation, right? You're trying to protect human life. But you end up causing harm to other things in the process.
Exactly. The Quran allows for fighting when people have been wronged. It even says that God will help them. But even in war, there are rules, there are limits. Surah Muhammad says that fighting is allowed until the war lays down its burdens.
So it's saying war should only happen as a last resort.
Yeah.
And the goal is to get back to peace. Yeah.
Exactly. The Quran says exhaust all your peaceful options first. And once the threat is over, you lay down your weapons and focus on healing and rebuilding.
I really love that. So as we're wrapping up this whole exploration of the permanent values, the relative values, all of that, you mentioned earlier that the ultimate goal is to become more like the divine.
Right.
And that really resonates with me because it feels like we've been talking about, not just rules, not just don'ts, but about aspirations, but ways to be better.
It is about striving for something higher.
Yeah. It's like instead of just trying to avoid doing bad stuff, we're trying to cultivate, I don't know, goodness inside ourselves and then let it shine out into the world.
That's a great way to put it. It is about transformation and about how these values can change not just our own lives, but also the lives of others.
It's like that ripple effect we were talking about, right?
Mhm.
Like even our smallest actions, they can create change.
Yeah.
And that spreads outwards. It touches our relationships,
Yeah.
our communities, the whole world even.
It's powerful. So you were asking how the Quran distinguishes between those who, embrace these values and those who don't.
Yeah. Is it just about belief?
It's more than that. It's about whether you accept these permanent values. Do you
Okay.
actually live by them? The Quran uses the term mu'min for those who do, and kafir for those who reject them.
So it's not about what you say you believe, but about how you live, the choices that you make every day.
That's it. It's about aligning your actions with those core values of justice, compassion, respect. And that's really powerful because it means we have the ability to change things,
Right.
to make the world a better place by choosing to embody those values.
This has been an incredible deep dive. Thank you so much for sharing all these insights with me, and with our listeners.
It's been my pleasure.
And to everyone listening, we encourage you to keep thinking about all of this. How can you apply these permanent values in your own life?
Yeah, how can you use them to make a difference?
Remember, building a better world, it starts with each and every one of us. This has been The Deep Dive. Until next time, keep searching, keep asking questions, and keep diving.